introductions, and I'm going to ask that we start with Claire, then followed by Sandra, Stephanie, and then Carly. So Claire, handing it over to you for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Marjorie, and it's a real pleasure to be here with you this evening, which is UK time, 7 p.m. UK time. So I'm Dr. Claire Bloomfield. I'm the CEO of the National Consortium of Intelligent Medical Imaging here in the UK, and I have the fortunate position of leading a consortium across NHS, academic, industry partners, as well as patient and charity groups to enable improvements in how we collaborate to deliver a more effective AI in healthcare. Handing over to the next of our lovely panelists.
Sandra.
Hi, I'm Sandra Kolner, and I'm the Global Director of Lab and Life Sciences Vertical at Intel. We're really motivated by our purpose to improve the health and well-being of all life on Earth. And we do this by being a strategic partner and collaborator and trusted advisor in the ecosystem, delivering hardware, software, and solutions that are really going to help us innovate in the health and life sciences areas, from medical imaging to clinical systems, laboratory genomics, pharma, and beyond. So really excited to be here today.
Great. Stephanie?
Hi, my name is Stephanie Sassman, and I am Portfolio Leader, Women's Health with Roche Pharmaceuticals. And in this role, I'm really excited to be representing our company across our pharmaceuticals, our diagnostics, and our insights business, and focusing really on the patient journey for women and what we can do to improve their lives. So really excited to be here with such an amazing panel and celebrating International Women's Day.
And Carly.
Sure, thanks, Marjorie. Hey folks, my name is Carly Yoder. I'm the Vice President and General Manager for Artificial Intelligence here at GE Healthcare, and I am thrilled to get the opportunity to be on the panel today with these brilliant women and the initiatives they're leading in their organizations. As far as my role, I lead the strategy and product rollout and implementation of AI across the GE Healthcare product line. We'll talk more about that later. And then more and more working very closely with the startup ecosystem through our Edison Developer Program to harness the hundreds of brilliant innovators around the globe with how they're harnessing AI to do good at a global scale. So, Marjorie, we're looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, ladies, for being here, and really excited to kick off the conversation. So my first sort of thinking, is a moment of reflection. Why are we here today? We are celebrating International Women's Day. And my first question, I'll have Carly, maybe you can take start us off, is why is International Women's Day important when it comes to women's healthcare?
Sure. Thanks for letting me get the ball rolling here, Marjorie. So look, I was thinking a little bit how to frame this, and let's just start with some of the numbers, right? When we think about healthcare, women are 50% of the patients. When we think further about healthcare, we're actually 65% of the workforce involved in healthcare. And when we think even further, we are 80% of the final deciders when it comes to care. Right, so we do a lot of the decision making when it comes to how we coordinate care in the healthcare space. So 50% of the patients, 65% of the workforce, and 80% of driving the main decision making. However, if you look at the flip side, only 13% of healthcare companies, institutions, this is provider, payer, device across the board, have a female CEO, and only 30% of leadership positions have women at the table. So what does this mean to me? It means that unlike a lot of industries, we actually have gotten pretty good at having women involved in healthcare. We just have a lot to improve in having women in leadership roles in healthcare. And so when I think about what this day means to me, I think about two things. And I think about both of them in what I want to do to fight. So number one, look, my career purpose, my career mission is to drive better healthcare outcomes by harnessing technology. We have to do that in healthcare for the female persona and the family members that she represents. How are we going to do this? We're going to do this by empowering women at all stages of their educational journey to get involved, empowering them to make the decisions to amplify the work that they're doing, thinking about getting diverse voices at the table. We've seen the studies across the board in every industry, where if the people making a product don't represent the people using a product, we fall short. We miss obvious steps in the process. So when I think about Choose to Challenge, I think about what is the work that I'm personally going to do to mentor, empower, and amplify so that together we can get the right folks at the table to drive better health outcomes.
Great. I'll call on one of our other panelists to chime in, and we'll get this flowing more. But maybe, Stephanie, you'd like to add your thoughts as well. What does Women's Day, why is International Women's Day important when it comes to women's healthcare?
Thank you, Midori. And I agree, Carly, with what you said. And I think, we've seen it particularly in the past year with the pandemic, but health systems around the world, really, no matter how advanced they are failing women. And there is opportunity for us to do so much more to lift women up, because we know that obviously they're the cornerstones of the families and the communities, making those decisions, as Carly mentioned. But we also know, there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful. We've seen some things coming out of this pandemic with the intersection of data and digital. And we also know that women are 75% more likely to use digital tools for healthcare. So I believe that it's important that we have International Women's Day as a reminder and also as a beacon for us to continue to lift women up and continue our advancements so that we can improve not only their health, but the health really of our whole communities and societies through women.
That is so true. Claire, as in your role, being sort of on the physician provider side of, more than maybe the rest of us, why do you think this is important to women in healthcare specifically?
I think patients and all patients want trust in the systems and the technologies they interact with. And there's a role to be played for a sense that it's been designed for end users. So if we want to keep that trust in both as a provider, as a clinician, or as a patient using that care system, that it's not been designed in a way that isn't considering our specific needs. So personalized or precision medicine, I think critically still comes back to, is it designed for everyone and yet is still tailored to an individual? And to do that means thinking and communicating about how we're using data, how we're incorporating different types of data and representation and diversity into that data to ensure that we're developing trustworthy solutions that clinicians will want to use to care for patients and patients will be happy to be used in their care. So trust, I think, sits at the heart of this, and we can ensure we develop that trustworthy relationship by having these kinds of conversations and making sure we're putting our money where our mouth is in terms of actually delivering on those commitments in the way we design and then deliver solutions for patients.
Great. Sandra, from your perspective, being part of a platform company, how do you think this day is important to women's healthcare? And specifically, is there an element of design for women, by women, and Carly touched on it, Claire touched on it. Would love to get your thoughts on that as well.
I think everybody's touched on some incredible inspirations, and absolutely, we need to get women at the table to design in. And I think that we're uniquely positioned to solve some problems in this industry. There's a history of that, right? And actually, one of the things I noted this morning, Carly, you were noted in an interesting article about Team Curie, and inspired by Marie Curie, the first who first created the mobile X-ray for World War I. And then we've seen leaders, to today, who are using different innovations through this pandemic to solve solutions, like Anush Ansari with the X Prize Foundation. They're inspiring women to dig into these challenges and use their strengths to create better healthcare for our mothers and our daughters and our friends and our leaders. And I just think it's really inspiring to see how an idea can be sparked and innovation then transforms healthcare as we need it in a variety of different ways.
That's great, and you're right. We oftentimes, think about these design for design concepts, but the article, today that came out around the Marie Curie all the way to today is a great example. And maybe Carly, I can call on you a little bit to share, what other projects are you working on that are improving women's health? I'm sure the audience would love to know what are some of the great innovations that are in the works out there. You set the bar really high.
So thank you, Marjorie. So for folks who don't know the article being referenced, there's a really neat story around one of our earliest, actually the earliest FDA regulatory cleared AI embedded on device solution that GE Healthcare brought to market a few years ago now. And the leadership team who brought it to market was actually all women. That was a little bit of a coincidence. But it was neat to sit back, look around the table, and have that realization, because most of us coming from technical or engineering backgrounds hadn't had that experience very often. So Marjorie, to your question about some of the other products in development, actually, let me start a little bit with a personal story and a product that's already out, and then I'll talk about a few more that are coming. But just on a personal note, my daughter just turned 1. And so about a year and a few months ago, I was at my own 20-week ultrasound exam. And I'm part of a medical device company. So you think I'd be really curious about how the ultrasound was working and the image quality and this. I didn't care at all. All I wanted to know was my baby okay? Or, I wanted the doctor to focus on me. I wanted to have a conversation with me and my husband. This was back when we could bring people in, so pre-COVID. And that's what all patients care about at the end of the day is can my doctor be focused on giving me the best possible care, medical device, and outcomes, right? And so one of the earliest AI solutions we brought to market was something called Sonos CNS, which is something that's embedded in a fetal ultrasound device and actually takes 85% of the manual steps out of a fetal brain exam. And that's a really powerful technology, but what it meant to me was my doctor was paying more attention to me and less attention on the device. And when I think about what AI can do across the health continuum, it's this intelligent efficiency. It's this ability to allow some of the most brilliant mission-driven individuals I've ever met, which is every provider out there, to focus on why they got into practicing healthcare, which was not documentation, which was not turning to a computer, but was turning to a patient, giving them the guidance, the coaching, the next step to drive better outcomes for their care. And this is the type of thing we're trying to drive across our product lines when it comes to AI. Things where we embed AI deep into an MR so we can, in less amount of time, create higher quality images. That's what we're doing with DL Recon and MR. Things like the critical care suite that Marjorie mentioned, where we can find critical conditions at the moment an image is captured, as opposed to potentially hours later when an image is viewed. These are the types of things that are going to deeply benefit patients, men and women, but patients at a global scale in a way that I find really encouraging and gets me up in the morning excited to keep fighting for this mission.
Fantastic, right? And if you think about even 5-10 years, mine are a little older than yours, but it's definitely not an option available, and just fascinating to see the pace of change, if you will, in this. I'm really curious, Stephanie, from your perspective, how does a company like Gentechs and Roche drive this, and what are some of the projects you're working on that you can share with our audience today?
Sure. No, I moved into this role last summer, and it was specifically set up because we do have the medicines, we obviously have the diagnostics test, we have the insights business, and it was really intended to really take a holistic view of all of the things that we could do across women's health and look at how we could bring forward integrated solutions. And so these are really just solutions that are going beyond the test, beyond the medicine, and looking at the patient journey and where are their hurdles and how can we bring in solutions. And we can bring those in through collaborations internally, but I think I'm even more excited about the collaborations that we could do externally. And I think Carly said it really well. I mean, patients are not sitting there trying to worry about each part of they are worrying about each part of their journey, but our vision is really that we can make that more seamless through greater partnerships with governments, with other innovative companies, with startups. We know that there's a long way to go, but there are a lot of things that can help us advance further. If we think, for example, just about breast cancer, and we look at the case of the developing versus the developed world, we know that in the United States, in Germany, 5 to 6% of women are diagnosed at the metastatic stage. But if you look at Africa, if you look at Vietnam, it's 70+% of women that are being diagnosed at the metastatic stage. There are opportunities to bring these women in far earlier through partnerships that we can set up with governments, through technologies like AI. We have to make sure, obviously, that those technologies have incorporated the diversity that is going to be needed so that we can identify women of all races and ethnicities. And so, you know, what our team is really looking to do is taking some of these very tough challenges that have existed for a long time and really choosing to look at that paradigm differently, albeit whether it's with breast cancer, whether it's eliminating cervical cancer, or whether we're thinking about enabling women to make choices about becoming mothers after cancer. We think through integrated solutions, through partnerships across the continuum of care, we can provide more for women and ultimately for their families and societies.
Fascinating. Sandra, from your perspective, you know, can you share, you know, Intel kind of being the broad global platform that it has, especially in sort of the developed versus the developing markets, like Stephanie alluded to, what do you see the differences are, and what are some of the projects you're taking on as a company towards that?
Yeah, and Stephanie, I think you set it up really well. I think it's utilizing some of the new technologies that like with what AI has to deliver, and applying that to some of the modalities that you know are considered standard of care. You know, Carly, you talked a bit about ultrasound, right? Ultrasound is a predominant modality, and it extends because of its mobility, its inexpensive nature, and the ability to do quick decision making is an incredible platform to hit many of these communities, right? And I think you know, one project that we've been working on actually with GE has been with COVID-19, right? How could we use ultrasound to look at the surface of the lung tissue where that virus lives? And by applying AI methodologies, we're able to really automate the range protocols, help with some of the measurement calculations that we're really empowering the physicians to make faster decisions and keep track of their patients over time. And that really AI helped to, I guess, to help with the increased accuracy with triaging and reduced user error, but increase some of the reproducibility. And that's, you know, in my opinion, what can really help to extend care across our RGO lines.
Great. Claire, what do you see in the UK as sort of the biggest opportunities, and what are some of the projects that you're involved in that are changing the paradigm?
Thanks, Marjorie. So I think there's two angles I wanted to pick up. There's women's health, so women's health conditions and how AI can play a role in there. And it's interesting, Sandra, that you mentioned again, ultrasound. What we're seeing as an emerging collaborative initiative between GE and one of our SME partners, Perspectum, is can we use ultrasound and MRI and image fusion for better detection and stratification of women experiencing endometriosis? We increasingly appreciate that this takes between 4 to 10 years to get an accurate diagnosis. It's incredibly painful. it's incredibly frustrating as a mental health experience to not be believed or diagnosed well, and that long protracted journey. So are there ways we can combine imaging modalities and combine imaging with AI to drive new insights in that space? And that's been great to see, because I think something NCME has uniquely done is brought together those different partners to pursue novel use cases that might not have been pursued as initial commercial low-hanging fruit for AI, but has real scope to have impact for women. The other aspect, I think, is just AI generally, and in making sure we're generating solutions that meet the needs of women and men, that generate solutions that are scalable and applicable in diverse settings. And that means ensuring your source data is diverse, not only in terms of gender, but in terms of ethnicity. And we've seen that with COVID, particularly, where underrepresentation of groups has a real impact in understanding the disease burden. There's some interesting data coming out showing a correlation between women who are on HRT and their survival in relation to COVID and long COVID symptoms. And there are these areas to pursue that it's not a women's health condition, but there are differences between men and women that we should be exploring as part of the research and as well as part of the design of solutions. And I think it's going to be exciting in terms of some of the work we're doing with GE around our lung cancer screening program, where we know women are being picked up disproportionately in terms of lung cancer through those screening initiatives and pilots that have happened globally, and understanding why is that happening, what is it that women are doing or not doing that are being picked up in screening programs, and how can we support and ensure that then patients are well cared for as a consequence of those variances that exist in the world.
Great. Think about it and reflect on it, right? These sound so simple, but yet here we are, and where we have self-driving cars, and we're not yet tackling these problems. I'd love to kind of, maybe I'll start with Sandra from a broader perspective around, for my next question is, what are the biggest opportunities of disruption that you see over the next 5 to 10 years for women specifically in healthcare?
Yeah, I think the first thing that pops into my mind is that I feel that AI is going to unleash the power of the right data so that women can make informed decisions off of real world evidence. And have those learnings at their fingertips. I think that the information is power, and we really need to design for the future to make things not only easier for the patient, but for our providers and our researchers that are going to just accelerate and transform care today. We're just at this cusp of being able to use these smarter tools, and I just see us sparking a new wave of care that will just be able to, for us to also combine new different types of data, or new different sets of data, right? We've got our imaging data, but what about all of that combined with wearable and activity data and realizing better health? So I think that's the opportunity that will come in the next 5 to 10 years, where we'll be able to pull the data, see insights in new ways, and transform the way that we look at care today.
Great. What do you think, Stephanie, from, adding, if I take Sandra's question and add the pharma or the sort of the genetics component to it, what are some of the opportunities that you think will be disruptive and in the next 5 to 10 years?
No, I would echo what Sandy said, because I agree, the data that we will be able to harness of the future in terms of the wearables and the genetic data, it's all very exciting. One of the things that we're very excited about is really unlocking the genetic data from data sets, patients that haven't been as included, right? Really looking into Africa and the fact that that population is growing, in India as well, the population is growing. And so ensuring that these data sets are actually representative, so we can truly make our healthcare, our medicine, our tests personalized to these patients is really critical. And it's an area that we are very committed to as a company. And so, I agree completely with what has been said. And I think what we want to make sure that we have is meaningful data that is truly representative for women. So that we are, when we are bringing forward this progress, that this progress is actually for all women, and we can truly bring personalized healthcare to women, regardless of where they live in the world or where they happen to be born in the world.
Can I chime in there, Marjorie? I was just going to say how much I agree with both Sandy and Steph's positions. I think there's almost a call to arms, though. So we can advocate for ourselves and advocate for other women. So our data matters, each woman's data matters. And I think people can get protective about sharing or use of their data. But it's important that we do contribute. And by being a data donor, we can ensure that the solutions that are generated can help us, our families, our broader communities, and we need to be part of that. So it's not a passive process. I think there's an active question to be had for those that are in a position to ask your healthcare professional, how is my data used for research? Are you using it in terms of what you're studying? Why are you not using my data more to ensure that we get the outcomes we want to see? And that's really exciting. The other aspect as well around multimodal data sets, there are solutions that will be generated we cannot imagine yet. The transformation in the last 10 years in terms of health data and AI and the journey in terms of individual uses of data is astounding. So who knows what will come next? But back to that call to arms of what do we want? What do we think matters? And that making sure that those designing the next innovations are solutions that we think are important for us, our daughters, our families, the generations to come, so we can be part of the designing the future we want to see.
Yeah, I can jump in on this too. I mean, there's not much to add for the AI person. You guys covered it really well. But let me frame it up a little bit. When I talk about the power of AI over the next 5 to 10 years, I think about how we have to get the first mile right and the last mile right. The first mile right is all about how you build AI in a way that generalizes, that is unbiased, that is trusted. I think Claire said this earlier, right? You only get one first impression. Trust is so important as we roll out this new technology. And so I think about this first mile, and I think about how women have to be involved in these data science processes, in these data management processes, in these scientific development processes, so we get this first mile right. However, when I talk about the last mile, it's how do you go from a science project to a healthcare product, right? And this piece also needs women at the table. We can do brilliant science and publish it and talk about the change it could make, but if we can't get it into the healthcare workflow, if we can't get it in clinicians' hands, if we can't get it to change the way patients interact with our healthcare system, it falls short of that promise of what this technology can do across the spectrum. And so it's even, I love that everyone's brought up these examples of this multimodal data, these use cases. I've been talking with customers and partners for years now around these topics. And every conversation we land at the same place. The AI is the easy stuff. The data integration and interoperability is the hard thing. And this is part of why at GE we've invested in our Edison platform to try to do the really almost not exciting, but the plumbing work to pull the data together so that the potential of these future use cases can really come to life. And we've done that investment in what you can even call the roads and bridges. Marjorie, one other thing that I think we should bring up on this topic of healthcare in the next 5 to 10 years, though, is the virtualization of care. I mean, I think the last year has been so tough. And I think it has touched, I would imagine, almost all of us personally. For myself, it has reconfirmed that I'm going to spend my career in healthcare fighting for the outcomes that matter. It also, though, gave a little bit of a fuel injection to things like telemedicine and virtual care in what I hope will be some really, really positive trends. Are we going to see the 75% adoption we saw in 2020? Absolutely not. But is it going to land somewhere above the 1% to 2% adoption we saw in 2019? Absolutely. And these are really, really powerful trends if you layer that impact on women. So one of the things we've seen in COVID, and this is a really tough stat to wrestle with, but it's the first time in 50 years where we've actually seen a decrease of the number of women in the workforce. And there's a lot of factors there. There's a lot of factors there to unpack. But we have seen women take on their unfair share, I will say, of the tasks it takes to run a household in a world where COVID took a lot of our normal steps out of the process. Imagine what it could look like if this was a telemedicine visit as opposed to driving into a hospital, doing a routine checkup. There's so much advancing that we're going to see in this space that allows us to interact with the healthcare system outside of brick and mortar. And so if I had to think about two trends that coming together will be extremely powerful and change the way we see healthcare 10 years from now, would be AI plus this virtualization trend.
So spot on. Right? I don't think I will ever ask for an in-person sick visit if I can avoid it for my kids. Those last-minute, unscheduled ones. Virtual medicine, please stay. So that's great. You know, I think as we're, and by the way, for those that are listening in, please think about and type in your questions. We'll get to those shortly in about 10 to 15 minutes. So part of this is you'll get to hear from our panelists on the questions. So I'll actually start with Stephanie for my next question around, you know, translating. You know, we talked a little bit about, okay, AI, virtual care. These are technologies that are out there, but are sort of impacting our world today. And these are the big areas about disruption. We talked about disparity. We talked about globalization. We talked about the fact that, you know, women are kind of taking the unfair share, if you will. But what recommendations would you make on what we can do today to impact these trends towards where we want it to be as women, as women in technology? I'd love to hear your thoughts, starting with Stephanie.
Yeah, so that's a lot, Midori, but I think one of the things we could certainly do, number one is, you know, for our daughters and for our women, you know, as they are pursuing their education, is really that emphasis on pursuing the science and technology. And I've been hopeful with seeing some of this, you know, effect in terms of additional, you know, subscriptions into medical schools. Hopefully we'll also see that with regard to science and engineering. And so I think that's one. We just have to really double down on that investment in the future. And then I think secondly, I think we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep raising our voice about it. I mean, it's been unacceptable to see the number of women that have had to step out of the workforce for a multitude of reasons. It's been unacceptable to see the rate of screenings for breast cancer, cervical cancer be decreased. I know that's happening for men as well, but we need to keep talking about this, and we need to keep asking the women that we love in our lives to go and get their screening, to seek out healthcare, right? To demand that virtual care. So I think it's a combination of investing in the future and not stopping to talk about it. We have to keep having the discussion and keep it alive, because we are far from there, but there's a huge opportunity ahead of us.
Great. Sandy, I'd love to get your thoughts on it as well. What do you think is the difference on what the audience can do today?
Yeah, no, Stephanie, you're spot on. And I mean, AI is really making it cool for these young girls, and we need to promote that, right? And loving to see that excitement and getting them involved in the innovations. But, you know, highlighting virtual care, right? With virtual care being as easy as it is, we have to get our screenings. We have to do preventative medicine. And I also think that, you know, it's important in the future to embrace some of the possibility of precision medicine, and with omics and all of this, the data. I want to unlock those silos. I want to allow interoperability and allow the discovery to happen. But in order for us to do that, we've got to get more people, more women in particular, and girls in data science. We have a huge deficit there, and we need to get them interested. We need those engineers to innovate. And I'm telling you, when we unlock that brain power, we don't even know what's possible. So that is what is exciting in the future.
I can just jump in on what Sandra was saying. Oh, you guys can hear me? Okay, all right. I heard some echo on my side. So, I mean, let me just start small, Madhuri. You said, like, what can people do right now? Think about the choose to challenge and make one small commitment, and then go find someone to hold you accountable, right? That commitment can be, I'm going to mentor one younger female. It's going to be, in the next month, I'm going to be listening to my women colleagues and amplifying their point when I agree. It can be, I'm going to look to represent and make sure that there are a diversity of voice, thought, and experience on the next panel I'm asked to be on. It can be so small, but I think the multiplier effect of tiny commitments really add up. And I think when it comes to some of these questions of inequality and bridging gaps that we see in society, it can sometimes feel so big that we don't start. And so I think my number one ask to folks would be is just pick something really small, and then pick someone you trust who's going to bug you and make sure that happens. I think that'd be my one thing, Audrey.
You can hold me accountable. That's a great one. Claire, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you guys to hold me accountable for making change now. And I'm also imagining this in my team. I think I couldn't agree with Carly more. I do think it starts small and it starts with you and what one thing you can do. So I feel quite fortunate to now be in a position where I'm leading groups of women. And there is this balance. It's easy to get sucked up into you're busy, you're doing the work. But how do you make sure you create space and time to coach, mentor, advise those you work with? And then alongside that, I think there is a responsibility on us to be open and authentic about our experiences. And I have a background in neuroscience. I'm not a techie, but it doesn't mean that I don't fit in science and tech. There is this sense of we need to show more diverse role models. And there is, you can't be it if you can't see it. And I think that is, again, about more voices and more types of ways to be in this space that are all valuable. I saw a really great article come out recently that Adam Grant was promoting about the importance of EQ, particularly in entrepreneurial startups, and this sense that skills that are often associated with women are critical to innovation and entrepreneurship. And we should value and celebrate those rather than apologizing for them as being soft skills or not critical as hard skills. We bring special things to the table and we should value those and recognize them and talk about them as part of how we encourage more people to feel like they belong in this space that we all work in.
That's so powerful. So just to kind of summarize our conversation, I'd love to kind of get your top takeaway. We'll start with you, Claire, that you'd like to share with the audience and the customers watching, and get your thoughts.
Well, I just firstly thank you for listening, and I appreciate International Women's Day has an awful lot of content and there's a lot of things to be engaging in. I'm going to steal Carly's though. I'm not going to take my own. I think Carly was right, is pick one thing and commit to delivering one small change. And by all of us doing that, we can transform the care that we see and transform the research we see to be more reflective of the world we live in and the challenges we're all facing. And one small addition to that is I think I feel fortunate to be in a country that is well supported in terms of healthcare. And I think there's an obligation on us to speak for those who can't necessarily speak. So thinking about how we scale globally, ensure that solutions that are developed don't just work in the UK or Europe or the US, and we make sure we develop healthcare that scales and impacts for everybody.
Great. Sandy, do you want to weigh in next?
Sure. And I also am really grateful for the opportunity today to choose to challenge. And I think that, choosing, I love the idea of taking one step, but I really do think we need to embrace as women all of our communities and encourage them to, innovate, to think of their ideas and to bring their unique passions right into this very diverse community. I think the discussion today has been fantastic. I'm inspired, and I know that we can really make some incredible disruptions and unleash the power of the data that is going to absolutely empower our future. So thank you for the opportunity today.
Great. Stephanie, would love to get your thoughts, and then we'll move on to Q&A.
Great. No, thank you, Midori. So, I mean, in addition to really empowering our daughters, our nieces, right, the younger generation about, not being shy to seek out a data science, a STEM career. I think the other thing that I try to do when sitting around, I guess now the virtual table at work, is really try to empower the voices and seek out the voices of the women that are younger in their career at the company. I really try to make sure that their ideas are heard, that they don't shy away from having an opinion and from having a voice. And that's something that I try to do in my everyday work. And I also feel really gratified by collaborating with them and by what I hear from them, because it actually makes the future look so much brighter.
Great, thank you for the great thoughts. So we'll go on to Q&A. We have some very interesting questions, and I'm eager to see what else comes in. So we'll start. Carly, I'm going to start with you. You seem to be my first choice. What do you think are how do we reconcile, if you will, the relative sparseness of data in healthcare and ensuring adequate diversity of data to mitigate the bias in AI models? Especially, we talked about women today, we talked about developed markets today. What do you think can be done in this space? Because there's I'm sure you worry about it. There's a high risk if the data is just what the representation today is, then these automations in the future are more biased than what they should be.
All right, how much time do we have left in this panel? In fact, there's a lot to unpack in that question. It's such an important question. So thank you to whoever put it in. I'm going to put Claire on the spot after I take a first stab at it, because I know she spends a lot of time thinking about this too. Whoever asked the question, you're absolutely right that in healthcare, we've never been better at generating data and worse at using it. So it's something like 3% of the data that we create, we actually use to drive insights, whether that's AI or just driving better workflows within the operations that we run now. And so, look, I think there's a couple things that I want to address when it comes to building data diversity. One, before you ever start the data science project, you need to have a data strategy in place. You can't think that as you build it, it will come. You have to think about what are the countries and demographics that I want this model to cover, and think about how you build the plan from day one or day zero on how you're going to work with partners in those regions and that cover those demographics to build that data, war chest. Otherwise, you're going to get too far in. You're going to have built a model that's brittle, which means it doesn't work well across multiple populations, and you'll lose the ability to build a model that generalizes. I do think on more of the exploratory research front, there's a lot going on around how you can create synthetic data at scale. So can you start with a kernel of real data and modify it in a way using an adjustment on physics or math or different extrapolation approaches to take a kernel of data and make it much, much more. There are also approaches to how you do much smarter annotations in data science. So one way to get around a very small, or I hope it's not very small, but a smaller data set is more precise annotation. So it will take millions upon millions of images if the way you train a model to recognize a cat versus a dog is just to label it cat dog. If you finally outline where the cat is, that training can happen on a smaller amount of data as long as the variety spread is right. And so there are lots of approaches that we are using to try to tackle this problem. But if you haven't thought about it before you started, it's going to be too late to course correct later. Claire, I'd love to hear some of your thinking, as I know you guys are working through similar issues.
Thanks, Carly. Yeah, so I think I look at it from a non-AI technical end so much as from the clinician provider end as well. We look at a system like the NHS. There is vast amounts of data, as Carly sort of alludes to. There's in theory, lots of data connectivity across the social healthcare system in the UK, but the data quality at source can be very, very variable. And that's because really we haven't, I don't think, communicated the value of that data in terms of care now solutions in the future. And so if you have 50 fields to fill in, why is that box getting filled? And that becomes important not only for the R&D, but also for deployment. So if we want to make sure that the solutions get back in and can do something useful, we need to make sure that there's still this linkage back to how clinicians and other groups are using that data at source. That should drive up data completeness in terms of those records, which means you get higher quality data. We know from within COVID, ethnicity was not well coded in the system, which meant there were gaps in terms of what we knew, which patients were suffering more and why, because there hadn't been a driver for including that data consistently. So I think I'd make an argument for not just driving data quality up for R&D and for innovation, but for service delivery, because you may not know why you need this data point now, but we do know that it might well be important in the future. And rewarding that behavior and embedding that into care and supporting that and recognizing that as being valuable, I think will drive up R&D and drive up the quality of the data that we're seeing. The other component I think I'd speak to is, particularly in our environment in the UK, is patient engagement and trust for the use of their data, and ensuring that not only are the regulators and the innovators demanding diverse data in terms of the solutions they're generating, that patients are asking for it as well. And that rather than a risk-averse approach in terms of use of their data, they're pushing for their data to be used to ensure that the solutions that are generated are reflective of their communities. So it takes a village again. We need clinicians involved, we need patients involved, and we need innovators involved.
I think that's so spot on. That makes me think about, so we are mindful and intentional about how do we get data diversity. I love your point, Carly, about thinking about the end and then kind of working backwards. And then if you think about the implementation or really being able to put that in scale, I think one of the things we talked about is telemedicine and virtual care plays a role, and how accelerated and how permeating that is. I'd love to get your thoughts, starting with Stephanie and then Sandra, around what regulatory changes do you see that need to stick for it to be more primary, not just in the US, but outside the US as well?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think that depends on where you live and what is legal and acceptable in your country that you live in. One of the things that we saw this year is that we had a breast cancer medicine that was available in subcutaneous form, where women could also take that at home. And that wasn't actually legal or possible in all of the countries. And so it was something where not only for their actual telemedicine, but also just for their care at home, there had to be different channels that we worked through in different countries in order to enable that to be something that could be afforded for women to get their care outside of the hospital and at home. And so I think we've seen with everything that's happened with COVID, that telemedicine is extremely viable, and in fact, for a lot of care and treatment, a better place for patients to get more equitable access. And so that definitely needs to be prioritized. And I think we need to have multiple stakeholders, including patients and physicians and companies raising their voice to ensure that that can be adopted more broadly and patients can get broader access to that.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. I think, Stephanie, you hit a few of my points. So I think standardization, right? That's going to be really key for us to align with many of the different regulatory bodies and across the globe. So, standardization is key, and that's something I think we can all lean into.
Great. And as I was kind of reflecting around our panel here, if you think about it, we have a major platform company, we have pharma, we have the medical device, and we have a major sort of provider base with the NHS. And what do you think, and I'll ask this question to each one of you, what do you think can be done from each of your industry verticals perspective to accelerate the adoption of technology, accelerate the adoption of regulatory changes so that, care, back to the first question we started with, why are we all here? Why is International Women's Day important to women's healthcare? how do you think we can kind of what is, I'm going to put you all on the spot, is what is sort of that one choose to challenge that you're going to take back to your company or to take back to your folks that you work with to accelerate impactful technology and disruption for women's healthcare? I'll start with Claire.
I was afraid you were going to come to me first with that one. It's a big question. I think if I was to look at one challenge the NHS faces in terms of adoption, and whether it's women's health for women, by women, is adoption of innovation at scale. There is a sense, particularly in AI at the moment, that I need data about my trust or my particular clinical use case. And to lower the barrier, to make it easier to adopt, I think we need to make it easier for people to be convinced by change. So how do we provide that evidence? How do we support people making good choices and not being afraid of change? And that's tough because particularly around AI, it feels very new, it feels revolutionary. And I think there's a way about how we engage with people and across groups to make that feel less scary, easier to support, and get that deployed at scale. So that's the thing I think we're trying to push for with NCME, is how do we make it easier for people to have the evidence they need to feel confident to deploy new innovations, and to do that rapidly.
Great. Harley.
I can jump in next on this and build on Claire. I think Claire said that, and I was thinking as you were phrasing the question to us, what's the one thing we could do in each of our industries? I actually wanted to respond and say we could all work better together across our various industries, right? And this is part of what I love about the companies represented on this panel today is, for instance, Sandra talked about, bringing AI to ultrasound device, right? That's a GE device, but it would be a terrible use of our time and expertise to build the Intel hardware and even the inferencing that they've optimized for their hardware. We need to focus on the pieces of that puzzle that we're excellent at. And we need to have trusted partners like Intel who help us take it to market in a regulated space. Same thing. I could use many examples with our partnership with Roche and the work that we're trying to do together there to think about in vitro and feature and how we can bring that together. And none of this is possible if we don't walk in the shoes of our clinical partners and the providers and really make sure at the end of the day, technology and product work that Roche, Intel, GE are doing together actually solves a problem that matters to Claire and her colleagues across the provider landscape. And I really think that one of the things we just have to get better at when we talk about harnessing some of the technologies that we talked about today is partnerships and ecosystems. And that includes the folks represented here, but also this startup ecosystem. I mean, if we are going to build the technologies that change the game, that allow us to have stepwise transformation, not incremental transformation for women and men across healthcare, we need every innovator at the table. We need to be able to fail fast. We need to be able to have some ideas that don't work, but build an infrastructure to let them go out and try it. And this is why we work so closely with the developer and startup ecosystem with the Edison Developer Program. And so I think that's where my mind went on, how can we do better? That yes, there's individual things we all can do in our own industries and viewpoints, but part of it is just knowing what we're excellent at and knowing where we need to go partner to run faster.
I couldn't agree more, Carly. I was just trying to jump in there. And I also think we can leverage from other highly regulated industries some of the technologies that have worked and apply that into healthcare to innovate. And we've done that through some of these collaborations, but the partner ecosystem is essential, and we have to listen to these pain points. I think, Carly, you just took the words right out of my mouth. Those are the three things that I noted. So I can definitely commit to choose to challenge there and partner even more effectively.
Great. And so I'll chime in and couldn't agree more with Carly and Sandy about the fact that collaboration is really going to be essential to how we move forward and really advance. we are always thinking as a company, what is our role? What is our unique item that we bring? And then where can we get the best? Whether it's from a big company like GE or Intel, or whether it's from the startup ecosystem. So we are really looking more at a patient journey lens, looking across the continuum of disease and looking for transformational partnerships throughout that journey, whether it's with medical device manufacturers, whether it's with technology, things that really can make the journey better. There's not going to be, you're not going to go wrong when you're trying to make a patient's journey or a woman's journey better. There's also a lot to be said about thinking about new and innovative business models. And sitting myself in the heart of San Francisco and Silicon Valley, I'm inspired by looking at a lot of the tech industry, and the fact that, they've often gone with a leap going into a new business model. And I think there's time now for us in the biotech and in the pharma industry to think about those new business models, think about something that's more focused on the patient and how we can bring forward a continuum of care that will be better for the patient. And if we keep that patient in the center, and if we try to collaborate with others around the table, I truly believe that we can make things much better for women and for our societies.
Well, fantastic. I want to thank everybody for their time, and especially Claire for your late evening time. This was a fascinating discussion, and for the audience watching, I hope you take a few minutes to think about how you can choose to challenge your specific area that you're involved in to accelerate women's healthcare, because if we address parity in women's healthcare, we address parity in healthcare. So thank you again, and really appreciate everyone's engagement and time.